On December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers flew the world's first airplane in powered, controlled flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Airborne 12 seconds, 120 feet, that flight changed the world. Just 11 years later, the United States Army began ordering a new airplane to train pilots. It was a Glenn Curtiss plane that became the JN-4, nicknamed the Jenny. More than 8,100 were produced, and 95% of American pilots learned to fly in the Jenny. Some Jennies were actually modified and flew combat in World War I. When the war ended in 1919, there were thousands of surplus Jennies. For $300, pilots bought Jennies and popularized civil aviation, barnstorming, stunt flying, wing walking, and flying air shows across the country. By the late 1920s, aircraft designers in the United States and Europe were churning out new planes with new capabilities. The Army now needed a new primary pilot trainer, and the Stearman Aviation Company created that plane, the Stearman. More than 10,000 were produced for $11,000 each. It was that plane that trained American pilots until the end of World War II. When World War II ended, the Army Air Corps again needed a new primary trainer without a tail wheel, not a tail dragger, realizing that future combat aircraft, fighters and bombers, props and jets would need a tricycle landing gear with a nose wheel. So in the late 1940s, Beechcraft created the T-34 Mentor, and North American Aviation created the T-28. The Navy needed a bigger engine on both. The test pilot on the Navy version of the T-28B was Bob Hoover. These airplanes trained American pilots for 7 decades. They served during the Korean War and Vietnam, all the way through to the Gulf Wars. And to tell us more about these two legendary airplanes, please welcome the owners and operators of these iconic aircraft as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the T-34 and the T-28.
Before we get started on the talking about these particular airplanes, let's point out particular airplanes that we have. We got a T-28C that's on the end. That's Dr. Glasser owns that airplane. This is a T-28A here with a red nose. It would have a 2-bladed prop on it, but it was an A model. It was used by the Air Force, obviously Air Force markings. Glasser's got, Dr. Glasser has Air Force markings on that. That's actually a Navy airplane. And then we have here behind us, we've got the T-34C, which that was a Navy training airplane. And that, see, there, Gary, I'm going to screw this up, I know it. Gary Scalepi. Is that close enough? Okay. Thank you very much. And then behind us is a T-34B, and that T-34B, T-34A, excuse me. Is that right? Or B? It's a B.
B. B.
Yeah, B. And that's Billy Smith owns that airplane. Now, we have right next to Dr. Glasser here is going to tell us about his particular airplane, and he holds an ACE-SAC ground level acro team card, and he is on that particular T-28 for 30 years, and over the years he's put different modifications on it. Paul Walter is a NATA historian. He's owner of T-34s and T-28s, and he's author of many T-34 and T-28 articles. You might have even written a book. I don't know. You written a book?
Not yet.
Well, why not? Okay. And then over here we have Tom Donovan. Where's Tom? Okay. He was an instructor in the T-34C. He's flown the T-34, both of them, the Bs and the Cs, and he's also flown the T-28. And now I'll just turn it over to you, Tom, and let you just take it from here.
Well, great. Hey, thanks for coming out. The sun's come out, the rain's gone away, and this is the 70th anniversary of the first flights of these airplanes, 70 years ago. So that's really amazing. Little bit additional information. Ralph Glasser's is really a Bravo model, and it started its life in the Navy, but it's really was used and the paint scheme is from Vietnam. These were planes that kept on getting recycled. If you go out in Warbird Alley, there's a Fennec out there. It started life as this T-28A in 1951 with an 800 horsepower engine, and ended its life, or it's not ended yet, it's still flying, as a Fennec with a big engine. So I'll tell you a little difference about the planes and the history of them, if that's okay. We came out of World War II. The U.S. government had 60,000 trainers, lots of trainers, but not a single one of them had a nose wheel. They were all tail wheels. Why? You had to teach aviators at that time, don't ground loop. All these fighters out here in tail wheel planes, and the dreaded ground loop is what they worried about. B-17s, don't ground loop. Well, they knew at the end of World War II, jets were the future, and they all had tricycle gear. Ground loops you can't ground loop a nose wheel plane. Very difficult. So why train people in a Stearman to fly a jet that's a nose wheel? They don't need to know that skill set of not ground looping a plane. So they came to North American and said, build a plane that will transition our students to your F-86. The F-86 Sabre was already in production. They were on the line in 1947. And they said, build this trainer, and the cockpit came right out of the F-86. The throttle's in the same position, the gear's in the same position. They wanted it complicated enough. So, they wanted it complicated enough that it would teach them how to fly, but not so complicated that they couldn't be the first students. And Mick down on the end, he's going to tell us it was one of the first planes he flew. Anyway, the Air Force said, we like them. They bought 1,200 of them with the little engine like this with a two-bladed prop. After a few years, they said, if we want to train people in jets, let's start them in jets. So they got the T-37 Tweet. And they took these and retired them, sold them. And the Navy then said, well, we'd like some. They had the B. And then when they wanted to teach aircraft carrier landings, and Mick's going to tell us about what it was like to land on a carrier, they developed the C with the tail hook. Those had the big engines. Well, the French had a little skirmish in Algeria, and they came and bought the A's from the U.S. government out of the Davis-Monthan, put big engines in them, and pretty soon the U.S. government, our plane in the front, is one that went to Congo for the CIA. Others went to Vietnam and Laos, and they were pulling them out of the desert, putting big engines, and those are the Delta, the Ds, the D5s, the D10s, and the Fennecs. So that's kind of the history of it. The T-34, as it said, these were about $180,000 in 1949. Walter Beach said, I can make a trainer a lot cheaper than that, and it's going to be a lot easier to maintain than a Stearman or an AT-6 has fabric wings, fabric control surfaces. So he came up with the Mentor, and the Mentor was so good, they put the turbine in it, and it was still being used to 2012. The T-28s, the Navy quit using them in 1984, but if you go out in the ramp, you'll see an Army one there. The Army kept on using them until 1993 to follow behind helicopters. So that's kind of the history of the T-28s. They got in civilian hands. They're all owned by civilians now. So that's how we get to today. And I think, Mick, why don't you tell us a little about carrier landings and what it was like to land on the Grey Goose, and how you approached this plane, and how it might have intimidated you a little bit because it's a little bit bigger than a Piper Cub.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, and whatever. And again, everybody, thanks for coming out today. A beautiful day, and hope you're just all having a wonderful time. My background is a Navy pilot during the Vietnam era, and went through a Navy training. And at that time, in order to be a naval pilot, you had to be carrier-qualled. So everybody who got their wings in the Navy was carrier-qualled. We ended up flying initially the T-34s, and then ended up graduating to the T-28s. The T-28s we could fly were the Bs and Cs. The B model has no tail hook, as Ralph's airplane at the end down there. And then the C model has a tail hook. There was about 299 of those built, whatever. And the C model is a lot of fun. It's got a shorter propeller on it because when you touch down on the carrier deck, they didn't want the prop hitting the carrier deck, so it gave a little bit more clearance. So the T-34C has a little less performance than the B. You had to carry about an inch or two of power if you're flying in formation with them. Landing on the carrier deck was a lot of fun. You see pictures of aircraft carriers are huge when you're next to them. The Lexington, when I used to, as a student, would go in Pensacola and go jogging next to the Lexington. It was his dock there at Naval Air Station Pensacola. The ship was huge. We practice FCLPs, field carrier landing practice at BT5 at Softley Field. And then when we got done with all the FCLPs and so on, you're qualified, then they sent you out to the boat. You'd fly out to the Gulf of Mexico. The Lexington would be out there. They used the Lexington as a training carrier. There were many other training carriers that the Navy used, the Antietam and so on, and lots of different carriers. But when my turn was out there, I flew it out to the Lexington. The Lexington, as you're up there holding this huge ship that you've seen pictures of aircraft carriers, when you're looking down on the thing, that little thing is so doggone small sitting down there in the Gulf of Mexico, you're wondering, how in the heck am I ever going to land on that thing? It's just so doggone tiny. Turns out it works out good. The training was wonderful. The instructors were great. The T-28s are very rugged and very reliable, and the entire process was a lot of fun. 325 feet, and then you roll in, you call the ball and fuel state and, Roger ball and so on. And then you just follow the meatball down and the touching down. It was a lot of fun. We did, back when I did it, we did 3 touch and goes initially to make sure that you got the flow of the pattern and so on. And then your next 6 traps, and then or 6 with the trap would mean this time that the hook was down, and you'd catch the CDP or the cross deck pennant or the wire, whatever you want to call it. And on the Lexington, you shot for the number 1 wire. A lot of other carriers and so on, maybe the wire number 2 or wire number 3 was where you were aiming for. But with the T-28s and the Lexington, we were shooting for the number 1 wire, and okay passes is the best you could do, and so that all worked out very good. Airplane comes to abrupt stop, after they, because you get the hook and make the stop. You don't use any brakes. It's a hook that fits in the wire and slows you all the way down. Then they back you up a little bit. They gave you the sign to raise the hook, and you raise that. Thanks. Then they bring you over to a line on the carrier that was a deck question. Launch. We didn't do any catch shots with the T-28s, and then they launch you right off the deck. You follow this center line right down the deck, and the airplane would get airborne, usually by the forward elevator of the Lexington, and then we just get in the pattern again for our 6 traps. Once we finished that, we went back up to the little holding pattern, waited for everybody to quit, and then flew home. And it was an exhilarating experience just to be out there. For those of you, it just was a lot of fun. For some of you that flying over water, like I was just talking with some folks, you get kind of make sure you're flying over water. You want to have all the emergency equipment and so on. But it never occurred to me that these T-28s, they were all so good and all that stuff that we'd fly out 50 miles out to find the carrier and fly it. And just had a wonderful time, not ever worried about it being over water or anything like that. So a wonderful experience with a great airplane. These airplanes are now still flying. A lot of C models are still around and so on, but it's a great experience, a wonderful airplane, and we've flown with a great bunch of people in the T-28 community, and I don't think you could get a better experience as far as have big sound, lots of power, and it's just a wonderful airplane to fly with great people. So thanks very much for coming out today.
One thing maybe you could cover, Mick, after you landed on the carrier, you were expected to take off.
Yeah.
And you always see in Top Gun, they put you on the catapult and blast you off. But they didn't blast you off. You had to just give it the power and go.
Right.
So I asked him, I said, well, what happened if the engine quit? And he goes, well, the boat runs over you.
Yeah,
so,
well.
I guess it took a different type of
yeah.
cat.
Well, one of the things, and that's why a lot of times you would, after takeoff, if you're on the angled deck, of course, you're already heading away, but after takeoff, you kind of want to make a turn just to get away from that, away from the heading of the ship, so that you wouldn't, if you did have a catastrophic engine failure or so on, that you'd be safe. They also had people there to, plane guards and rescue people to take care of you if you got in. So it was a very well-run operation, and with all the training we had, which was, I think second to none. That Navy training really put you out so you knew what you were doing. So it was a wonderful operation, and just great to be a part of it.
So just a little offside here, but the Navy, NAVY, stands for Never Actually Volunteer Yourself. Mick did volunteer for one mission. That was to fly Miss America, or was it Miss USA?
Miss USA. Yeah.
Miss USA and Holly Berry around Europe. So he volunteered himself. And now he's the lead of the Trojan Thunder. So we'll see him later today when Doc is a solo and Mick's lead. I'm number 2, and some of the other guys here among it. With that, Doc, you've owned your T-28 now 30 years as a civilian. You went out in the boneyard to find it, right? Maybe you can explain that.
So, again, welcome everybody. I bought a Bonanza in 1986, and I was looking for something a little more fun. Looked at a Pitt Special, looked at a Casa Saida jet, and then I went to an air show in June of '89 and saw one of these beasts sitting on the tarmac, and I didn't know what it was. And I looked and looked, and I walked up to the guy in a flight suit standing there, and I said, "Is that a P-47 with a nose wheel?" A dumb question, obviously, and he didn't move a muscle except the corner of his mouth to say T-28. I'd never heard of one. So I went home, and about a week later, there was an article in AOPA Pilot, cover article, the T-28 Trojan, and I went over and I said, boy, this is a great plane. I got to buy one before the prices go up. So I started looking and found NATA, which is our North American Trainer Association, contacted them, and they sent me an article by one of the T-28 gurus back then, John Harrison. He called it the Marvel Mystery Warbird. And it starts out, what warbird is out there with 1,425 horsepower? It can pull 6 Gs. It can outturn and outclimb a P-51 Mustang, has all hydraulic controls, has 4 electrical systems, and can be bought at the fraction of a price. Oh, the T-28. And then I was really pumped up. So I looked around from the East Coast to the West Coast for a T-28, and NATA suggested, well, why not go to the Boneyard, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, see if there's any available for sale. So this was now July of 1989. And at that time, there were 25 T-28s sitting on the field at Davis-Monthan, owned by the Navy Museum in Pensacola. And in May of '89, they were looking to restore a PBY Catalina and needed a wing. Well, of course, there are no wings in the parts bin, so they found a civilian who had a wing and traded 5 T-28s on paper for a PBY wing in May of '89. In June of '89, that person sold 3 of them to a T-28 parts dealer in Picayune, Mississippi for $30,000 apiece. 2 months later, the Honduran Air Force was releasing all its T-28 parts, and so he quick sold them for $45,000 apiece to a broker in Florida. So when I went out to Davis-Monthan, they said, well, these 3 are available for sale. And I looked at the books, looked at the plane, and picked the best of the lot. And they said, well, write a check for $90,000 to the broker in Florida. So from May or June till August, it went up from 30 to 90,000. And it had been sitting in the boneyard since 78. So my plane was manufactured October 55, 2 months before I was manufactured, and served with the Navy, including 2 years in Kaneohe Bay in Hawaii, but mostly down in Florida, training Navy pilots, flying 11,000 hours from 1955 till 1978 when it was put in storage. In those 11,000 hours, it also got 11 engines. And these engines are basically what was on a B-17, but more horsepower. They bumped them up to 1425. So this plane had been sitting out there. I came back 2 months later. They towed it across the lot from Davis-Monthan, put the engine on, took the prop out of the box, and the guy licensed it for me for 10 grand. So 100 grand. I was in with a T-28 that still had the spray latex all over it, cobwebs in the inspection panels, which he never opened, and so forth. So I flew it. I had to fly it for 15 hours for the insurance company. I told the guy, well, you're going to get my back seat, which he wasn't expecting. So we're at Tucson International doing touch and goes for an hour or so. And on the 10th one, all of a sudden, electrical smoke fills the cockpit. And I said, what do we do now? And he says, well, I guess the next one's a full stop landing. And the generator had torched on it. He never bothered to oil anything. But anyway, I thought that rather than taking this plane home to Illinois, I'd take it out to California to Bob Hoover's mechanic, Bob Grant at Great American Aircraft in Torrance. And he was going to do a 6-week once-over to really inspect things and clean it up. Well, he called me at home a month later and said, listen, do you want that carburetor overhauled? It's been sitting in a box for 11 years. And I said, well, how much does that cost? He said, well, it'll be $1,000. I said, well, it got me from Tucson to California. Don't overhaul it. But then I slept on it, and the next day I said, go ahead and overhaul it. So they sent it out to a great shop in Washington State, and they overhauled it. Unfortunately, that 6 weeks turned into a year before I got the plane back. It was just busy. But when I got the plane, I flew it all the way home, and that was December of 1990. I took off with a guy in the back seat, and we got to about 1,000 feet. I went from takeoff power to climb power, and the engine just quit. I said, what's going on here? And I made the turn, tried to restart the engine by hitting primer, but I came up about 15 feet short of a taxiway. When I threw the gear out the last second, it just stopped flying, and whoomp, it hit quite hard and rolled off into the dirt. And I didn't think it was much worse than most of my landings up to that point. But we had bent the wing up, and the plane was kind of totaled. Well, it turned out that that carburetor that got overhauled, there's a fuel metering valve inside that gets safety wired, and they had forgotten to safety wire it. So after 27 hours, it wobbled free, and when I went from takeoff power to climb power, it just flooded the engine, and hitting the primer certainly didn't help that. So the plane got disassembled. 2 guys came out from California. 8 hours later, it was on a flatbed truck, very quick. Truck back to California for a year. I had a bent wing, and I said, well, what am I going to do about that? And they said, well, there's 3 wings built up for Vietnam, the D wings with all the hard points, sitting in crates in Reno, Nevada, $10,000 wingtip to wingtip. And I said, well, sold. So I got a new wing with all the hard points, and that's when I started looking at the manuals, seeing, the different paint schemes, what could I do, what carried all that armament. And I found this Vietnam camo scheme that just looked really awesome. My wife looked at it and said, oh, that's ugly. And so she pages through, how about this pretty one? So that's Eglin Air Force Base in 1961, just before they went to Vietnam. It's a D-10, which was a B model converted to a D model. Now, to make a D model out of a B, you've already got the big engine, but you get the wing with the hard points. You get armor plating around the seats, which I don't carry, self-sealing wing fuel tanks, and a thing called the Yankee extraction system, which was just a big bottle rocket sitting behind your head. And if you had to go, the det cord would explode the canopy, hopefully, but if not, the rocket would punch through it and just pull you out of your seat, and there you are in free fall, and you pull the ripcord. Not exactly a 0-0 system, but it saved some lives in Vietnam. So mine, except for the bottle rocket and the armor plate, is pretty much a D10. I also found all the armaments. So I've got bombs, rockets, machine gun pods, but you just can't do aerobatics with all that stuff, so that stuff's at home right now. I brought it to EAA in 1992, not knowing what the heck was going on. In fact, I came late because I couldn't get the engine started, and I fussed over it for 2 days. And finally, I looked at the ignition vibrator box, and a little washer had floated up during my meager aerobatic attempts and grounded out the magneto at the starter of the vibrator. And I just, oh, what's this doing here? I pulled it out. Vroom, I start up. I show up late to the show by about 4 days, and everybody went crazy over the plane, and it won Grand Champion Warbird in 1992. And it's actually the last Grand Champion Warbird ever, because when I showed up, I beat a Corsair that was absolutely beautiful, but they gave complexity points. And because of the hydraulic systems, the electrical systems, all that, I got a couple extra points, and I beat him. And boy, was he hot. So at that point, he talked to the directors, and then the very next show, they split it out. Grand Champion Warbird, World War II. Grand Champion Warbird, post-World War II. So I have the distinction of being the last Grand Champion Warbird. So that was back in 92. I was flying it. I started doing aerobatics up at 10,000 feet and got my low-level waiver a few years later. And then I was approached in 2003 for a new air show team called the Trojan Horsemen. And we did a 6-plane formation and aerobatic show for 14 years, and I was the lead aerobatic guy and just had a blast with that. Also, during those years, we flew at Oshkosh. Most of you have seen or been in the big wings that we fly. But my distinction back then in 92, 93, I'd come out here, and we'd be sitting all day till the afternoon show. I said, what the heck's with that? Let's go fly. So I started what's called the morning calisthenics. And we meet on the Warbird porch early in the morning. We put together the flights. We go out and fly, make some passes like that beautiful B-17 is doing, and then come in and land and get our extra licks in. So between that and flying in the shows, it's just been an absolute treat. 2 years ago, we started the Trojan Thunder, which you'll hopefully have the pleasure of seeing this afternoon. After the big Warbird show, we'll be doing our performance. But it's been an absolute thrill to have that plane. I've had it for 30 years now and operated it for 7 years longer than the military did, so I guess you can almost call it mine now. I've had about $1 million worth of fun in the plane. It's cost me $2 million to do it, but I still wouldn't trade it, and I've got a very understanding wife and a very supportive daughter and son-in-law who are in the audience today. First time she's been here since she was 1.5 years old, so welcome back, Sarah. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Anyway, that's kind of the gig with the Trojan there.
Thanks, Doc. Yeah, the T-28s were really rare back in the 70s and 80s. Ours came from the Congo, and in 1978, it was traded even up for a P-51 Mustang. So if anybody wants to make that trade again, my wife, who's sitting back here, give them a hand. It's really her airplane. She wanted it. She'd be willing to trade for a P-51, I think. Okay, thanks. Well, great. Now we'll talk a little about the T-34, Walter Beach. And you say, that kind of looks like a Bonanza. Well, that's what started. It was a Bonanza. And there's a little petite woman named Betty Skelton. Betty Skelton was a race car driver, but Walter Beach, he was pretty clever. He said, I'm going to have Betty take it around to military bases, the prototype. And she debuted it in 1949. And the military, they liked that plane. That was great. Both the Navy and the Air Force, maybe the Air Force a little more than the Navy, because they said this is a bit much for somebody the first time they ever flew a plane to fly this. So they developed the T-34A Alpha. The Navy wanted it, but they didn't want all the development costs. So they said, well, how can we avoid that? We want the A, but we don't want to split. The government's going to make us pay half the development cost. So they said, well, let's call it a new model, a T-34 Bravo. This is a Bravo. And what they did, they put 1 degree more dihedral in the In the T-34A, the seats go back and forth. In the B, the pedals go back and forth. The A's got nose wheel steering, the B doesn't. Other than that, they're almost identical. But that that helped the Navy not have to pick up the development cost of the T-34 Mentor. And then later on, it was such a great plane, they put the turboprop in, and it became the Charlie. So we're really lucky to have a Charlie. I think there's only 2 or 3 in civilian hands. The ones in the U.S. government, they're sitting out in Davis-Monthan, and every month there's another group of them gets shoved into the shredder, and they come out in pieces this big. So with that, we've got somebody that flew both the B and the C and the T-28, and this is a neat thing about Tom. When he jumped in that plane, he didn't have a driver's license yet, right? He was from New York. You don't need a car in New York City. So he went down, and I don't know if they have this photo of Tom, but he's got his helmet, and he looks mighty spiffy there as a young man. I don't know how old you were, but...
About 22 then, Paul, but thin and a mustache as well. So, first of all, thank you all for being here. We commemorate the 70th anniversary. It's a great aircraft. Like Paul said, I started out in the T-34 Bravo. I've flown all these aircraft as an instructor, and I flew the T-34 Bravo and the T-34 as a student, and the T-28 as a student. So I look back as I was starting to prepare for this Oshkosh given to 70. I started connecting some dots. I think I'm probably the only former naval aviator who's flown all 3 aircraft as an instructor. After going through primary flight training, I came back once I got my wings right back to a T-34 squadron at Saltfleet Field with a whopping 220 hours under my belt. My wings of gold, and now I'm teaching students with 0 hours. So needless to say, we were learning about it at the same pace, trying to keep ahead of the student. The reason I wound up flying the T-20 is we closed down Saltfleet Field in December of 1976. We decommissioned the squadrons, the T-34s retired, and I still had time on my orders, so I wound up going up to Whiting Field, where I then go to fly the T-28 for about 18 months. As I started doing some more research and looking through my old logbooks, it turns out I flew Doc's plane on 5 occasions. And I sent him my logbook entries, and it was really kind of neat to stroll down memory lane and say, hey, this is amazing, okay. And then fast forward, 18 years after I soloed, I wound up getting command of a training squadron in Texas that flew the T-34 Charlie. So I think the Navy is trying to send me a message here. You didn't get it right in the Bravo. We couldn't get you right in the 28 in primary. And now maybe we'll get it right in the Charlie. One thing I want to note for you, though, when we shut down Saltfleet, there was a challenge. We didn't have a primary trainer. So for about an 18-month, almost 2-year period before the Charlie came online, that was the T-28 was the first aircraft a student would strap on. So you didn't walk up on the wing. You had to pull the handle, bring the flaps down, and climb up onto the aircraft. So going from nothing to 1,425 horsepower as an instructor with a student could get very interesting, especially the first takeoff. I kind of made the analogy, if I could have put a paint roller with white paint under it on that first takeoff, it would be nothing like an S-turn going back and forth as your student's getting behind power, ahead of power, trying to maintain directional control. But I will say it's like anything else. It's all relative. If you don't know anything different, then it's the first thing you fly. And so, quite frankly, if you didn't think you could strap it on, they did, and the students did very well in this. And we were training Iranians and Kuwaitis as students as well during that time. So I come from it from a little different perspective. Yes, I did get my license 4 days after I got my wings. In fact, the car I used was a Mustang, and my buddy here, Denny Flang, and Bob Delaney, who are all Navy buddies, are in the bleachers here, so don't ask me any hard questions. I got stories on you guys too. And so the bottom line, I got my wings. 4 days later, I went down to the DMV in Texas. Big state trooper, big hair. Now, 1974, 76, if you remember, long hair was in vogue. Well, obviously, we're in the military, so we stood out. So this big Texas state trooper looks at me. What are you here for, son? Well, sir, I'm here to get my driver's license. What are you talking about? weren't you just over here flying those planes and stuff? You just, oh, well, yes, sir, I did. Just got my wings. He goes, son, you're doing things backwards. Well, the driver says, Daddy drives me over because I couldn't drive the car over. And I'm like number 5 in the line here with a bunch of guys sitting there against the wall. And the state trooper just looks over to the lady behind and goes, I got him first. So I go to the head of the line. I'm going, I'm not sure this is good or bad. And so he goes, get in, son. So he goes, strap in. All right, start her up. He goes, okay, turn right, turn right, turn right, turn right. And we literally run around the DMV, but he goes, you're good to go. God bless you. And it turns out he had been a Marine drill instructor. He said, Semper Fi, Tom. Good luck to you. And so, that was going full circle. So that's my experience. I've loved these planes. They all have unique aspects to them. The one thing about the Charlie, it's got beta, which means you can reverse the blade angle and stop very quickly. And that's it. So if I have plenty of stories, so I got to stop now. So plenty of sea stories. All right, Paul.
Well, thank you. I just want to acknowledge my son and daughter out here. Joe, he's an F-16 driver for many years, Wisconsin Guard. Now he's KC-135 out of Milwaukee, and he also is a United 777. And Lindy, 99er, she flies out of California. So with that,
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
I want to also, I've been away, after I retired out of the Pentagon in 99, I kind of got away from aviation, was doing the corporate stuff. And I want to thank especially my cousin Gary, who I've been sitting in the back seat, 180 pounds of counterweight. It is T-34 flying with the Lima team. And so my cousin Gary Donovan has rekindled my flame. So thanks, cuz, for all your efforts in getting me back into flying again.
We have time for some questions and answers, and Robert here's got the mic, and whoever, raise your hand. Anybody have a question? Surely there must be somebody that doesn't know something. Here we are.
I see some of the T-28s with the larger tire wheel and some with the smaller. Is there an advantage to one versus the other?
well, the A's all came with the large tire, and if you look at them, they have a hydraulic steering. Now, some of that's been disconnected with them, but the A's started that way. For the B and the C, it's differential, and as far as we can tell, all the B's and C's, because they, much bigger engine, a lot more weight, came with a small wheel. The trouble with the small wheel is if you land on grass, it's going to flip right over. So when I went to Vietnam and places like that, people got to putting the big wheel on. And to tell you the truth, Doc's got the big wheel because he's a D model. D models had big tires on them because they were landing on unapproved airports. So the difference is the big wheels might go off in the grass. Yeah.
Yeah, the other reason that you might see the smaller nose tire on some of the T-28s out here is that smaller tire is a high-pressure tire. It has less rebounds, so that when you're landing on the carrier deck with that high-pressure tire, it's not like a basketball effect that it would bounce and so on. And that's the reason for the high-pressure tire, which is smaller. Also with the A model, if you notice a smaller engine, but look at the canopy difference in the two airplanes. The A model has a much higher canopy, and initially they thought there was going to be a little stability problem, whatever. So notice the roll bar that's up on the top of the canopy of this A model right here. Whereas later on with the B's and C's, they made the canopy smaller and removed the roll bar once they figured out that these airplanes were going to be very stable on the ground and so on. So, but kind of an interesting thing. This is a wonderful A model here with the high canopy and the roll bar up there.
Yeah.
Next
And we were,
question.
oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, we had a volunteer from Texas going to bring Paul Poberezny's old A, and you made it part way, right? And then the generator started giving grief, so Vince stepped in and said we could have his on display. So thank you very much, and thanks for the attempt to bring Paul's old plane up here.
Next.
This is not a question as much as a shout out for you guys, for the T-28 guys from Sheboygan. I'm on the board of directors for the Aviation Heritage Center. Paul and Doc, such a great professional group of flyers. They come down and do their air clinic for the last 11 years at our airport, and they use our aviation facility, and it's been a gas. You guys are fantastic, pros all the way through, and just having the people from Sheboygan being able to watch you guys and get up close and personal has been a really great experience for everybody. So that's what I wanted to tell you guys. Awesome.
Thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, Doc.
Is that it, Robert?
Out in the distance here, there's some Stearmans that are flying around. They're celebrating their 85th anniversary, and this is the 70th. So they've came a long way from a Stearman to these in 15 years.
We have one more question here.
Howdy. Can y'all hear me? All right. So I was the one that was supposed to bring Paul Parbraziny's airplane up, like he said. But one of the cool things I was reading through the POH that stuck out to me, it says the airplane has excellent stability and control characteristics under all conditions of speed, power, load factor, Gs, and altitude. The controls are effective through the speed range, and airplane response to control movement is quite rapid. The 100 degree per second rate of roll is comparable to that of normally found only in fighters. So when I read that, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. You know, you're flying an airplane that has fighter characteristics in a trainer aircraft. So,
Thanks a lot, folks. We have, that'll be the end of our question and answers. We also have some challenge coins, and they're provided us by, well, we have one more question. Excuse me. Oh, I see her. How can I miss her? Anyway, we have challenge coins from the Fagan Fighters World War II Museum that we talked about earlier in Granite Falls. And for our veterans and our beautiful lady here with a little straw hat on and a blue shirt, she has them in her little basket. If you'll come up, she'll be glad to give them to you.